Okay, can you hear me now? We're waiting for Sandra to join us again. I know the video is kind of weird at the moment, but to stage. Okay. Yep.
Here I am?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now? We're waiting for Sandra to join us again. I know the video is kind of weird at the moment, but to stage. Okay.
Here I am?
Yes. Okay, I'm getting audio looping. Is that coming from your end, Sandra? Join us again. I know the video is kind of weird at the moment, but to stage.
All right.
Okay, is that better? Okay, that seems to be working, maybe, hopefully.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, all right. Hopefully that echo is stopping.
The echo was my fault. I had the YouTube stream open,
Got it.
so that's
All
what happened
good.
there.
All
Totally
good.
my bad.
Thank you guys for being patient with us once again as we go through our monthly ritual of trying to figure out how to get the audio to work. One of these days we will solve this problem. Apparently that day is not today, but we're making progress. So, okay, we're here. Hello. Welcome to the stream. So yeah, we have a list of questions from our Patreon members, and we're going to go through those today. I'm joined today by my special guest, Sandra Taylor. If you've listened to the podcast, I'm sure you've heard Sandra many times, but Sandra, why don't you explain a little bit who you are and why you're on the stream with us today?
Absolutely. Longtime friend of the podcast. I've been around and adjacent since day one, really, because I happen to be married to Howard, podcast host. But I'm here today because I've launched a project. It's called Structuring Life to Support Creativity. It is a book designed to help creative people make more space in the life you have for the creative work that you want to be doing. And so that project has launched on BackerKit just today, and it is nearly funded. So I'm really, really happy it has done. I am thrilled at how many people are showing up for this book. And so I'm here today to talk about anything related to that and to help with other writing questions, as I have done quite a lot of writing at various places and times.
Excellent.
Yes.
And chat, if you'd like it, I am dropping it in the chat right now. That is a really very exciting project, and congratulations on launching that. So if you're interested in checking out the project, the link should be in the chat right now for all those on YouTube. So you can go check it out there. But in the meantime, Sandra's going to share some wisdom with us directly and help me answer some of these questions.
Absolutely.
Do you want to go ahead and start with the first one? Do you want to read it out for us?
I will read it out for us. Absolutely. All right. The question is, hi, I'm writing a story that is a retelling of a fairy tale. The story follows the fairy tale for a bit, although named with different names and setting, before deviating at a certain point. For example's sake, let's say that it is Cinderella goes to the ball, but when she's dancing with the prince, he pulls a knife on her and demands to know where the fairy godmother is so he can have the magic for himself. I would like to read this story. I was wondering how much of the original fairy tale I should write up until the point where it deviates. How many of my beginning chapters should be Cinderella doing the washing, arguing with her family, meeting the fairy, going to the ball, etc. Thank you.
This is a great question. I love this idea, and it's always a good challenge with doing retellings of like how much to give people sort of the thing that they're already familiar with to set it up so that they know the beats and they understand what kind of story they're in, and then where is it do you break? Where do you start switching it up? Do you have a thought, Sandra, of like where that break point is?
Well, it's the same question. It's the same where do I start the story question that goes with anytime you're writing a story is where does the action start? What is your actual inciting incident? Mm-hmm. And how much do you need to put before that so that the reader is oriented to your story? Where, if you're going with a fairy tale retelling, which I actually love fairy tale retellings, you actually have an advantage because people already know Cinderella. And so all you have to do is give them enough so that they can infer the rest, and then you can move forward. Because if your point is not, I am doing a Cinderella retelling, then I don't, as a reader, want every beat point. I just want enough context so that we can go on with the story you're actually telling. Instead of, if you seat me too hard in Cinderella, I'm going to want the rest of Cinderella.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that's actually why, to be the counterpoint here, I don't like fairy tale retellings, right?
Okay.
I don't like fairy tale and Shakespeare retellings because I think it really draws attention to this idea that, like, you have your story set up, right? And then you're going to break from that at some point and just go off in your own direction. The problem is that whenever you're telling a story, you kind of need to be doing that anyways, right? All stories we're telling tap into storytelling patterns and do things we're really familiar with. So my obnoxious answer in some ways, like, it's a retelling. I'm like, well, everything's a retelling, so why is yours special, right? Like,
right.
That is my knee-jerk reaction. I try not to actually say that to people, and it's a top level thought. It's a first level thought. It's not like my actual nuanced opinion on this, right? But it kind of points at the issue that I see in these stories a lot of the time, where you have the setup that you're doing to get us into the story, right? And in this case, this is like Cinderella, right? Here's the scullery maid, here's the evil stepsisters, here's the evil stepmother, here's the tragic dead father. Like, you're giving us all of these beats. Now, the problem is, if you don't give us those beats, we don't know what kind of story we're in. If you give them to us in a way that feels really perfunctory, then we're kind of bored because we know the story already, right? And kind of like you were saying, we'd rather just be reading Cinderella, right? So walking that line is really tricky. So you kind of need a little nudge, nudge, wink, wink to, like, invite the reader in to be like, I know you know this story. I know that you know how this goes. I just need you to hang with me for 1 second while we get to the point that it starts to deviate. So I think you need those early hints that things are going to deviate while you're running through the familiar beats that are setting the story up. And then, find a way to signal to the reader early on, like, we're going to be breaking, whether that is like a frame story around it of somebody being like, it's a fairy tale, but not like, right? Or, to have like one of the talking mice being like a little weirdo who was like giving indication that something is different, something's up in this world, something is different, just like a little like grain of sand in your little oyster shell of a story, right? And so kind of setting that up. So I think in terms of the original fairy tale stuff, I will say as little as you can get away with and not feel like you're just shirking your duty and setting up the story. That's the short answer to the very long roundabout way I got there.
I like it. All right. You're going to read off the next one?
Sure. Okay. This next question is, a lot of advice pitched at helping authors network is aimed at the sort of folks who don't have a lot of experience starting up conversations with new people. What if you are already very skilled at in-person networking, as in that's a major part of your day job? What are the main conferences or other venues to attend? Is there anything that someone with a more networking heavy background should know? I love this question. Sandra, you're a very good networker. What's your thought on this?
Well, one of the things to be aware of is whatever the context you're usually networking in, you need to be aware of how it differs from the writer space. There's different expectations. There's different ways that people socialize. And so I'm going to assume that you're a good enough networker that you've already clocked that and adapted for it, in which case, great. But I would definitely say that if you know you are strong at interpersonal interactions, that you're good at networking and talking to people, then the plan to go to a lot of events is a smart one. But one of the things I always tell people about going to events is that an event is a time when you're tilling the ground and planting the seeds. It's not when you're harvesting anything.
Yeah.
So pay attention, be aware of that. You're not going to close a deal. Depending on what kind of networking you do, some events you're there to close deals, but that's not the way the writer space works. As for which events, my personal preference is smaller ones where there's more opportunity to talk in depth,
Hmm.
but I don't know that that's always the best call for everybody. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it really depends on your goal, right? Like,
Right.
I think if you are early stage writer trying to make a bunch of connections, meet as many people as possible, but not necessarily connect with movers and shakers, then something like a Comic Con can be useful because there's a billion people there. So you'll get to meet a lot of people and try and make connections and find a group that sort of vibes with you. The problem is there's a billion people there and they're all functionally insane at that point, running around trying to do a million things at once, right? So your opportunity to have that a richer conversation with them can be really constrained. Um, Smaller events can be really good for getting FaceTime and one-on-one time. But also smaller events, often people are there with their friends. Like I know when I go to a smaller con, it's usually because it's one my friends go to, or I know people who are going to be there. And so sometimes it's harder to break into existing groups because they've kind of like are there to hang out with their friends in a certain way, right? So a
Mhm.
smaller con can be challenging in that way. In general, though, I think your odds are going to be better at a smaller convention. I know for me, I have definitely like the conferences that I've been to where I've like signed clients or built relationships or sold books are the ones that are small, right? That were a couple
Mhm.
hundred people, not the ones that were 10,000 people. Like 10,000 people, like,
That's too
um,
big. That's hard to connect.
yeah. Sorry, my
Yeah.
like monitors decided now's the time to ask me if I want to do a pixel clean. Anyways, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm
Whatever.
getting a notification blocking a good quarter of my screen.
That
Um,
is so fun for you.
it went away. Thank you,
That's
monitor, for doing
that's
that. This is
great.
no problem. All new setup, all new equipment.
Yeah.
I'm like, what does everything do?
Yeah.
Okay, so smaller cons can be useful. Here's my. I love that you're asking this question about like advice being pitched at authors is like aimed at like people who don't know how to network, but what if you do know how to network, right? And Sandra, I think your point was like really spot on of like if you know how to network in other industries, I think your instincts may be tuned towards a different goal than networking in the writing community. Because in the writing community, it really is longer term goals and really is slow relationship building, not really trying to clinch an action or a sale, right? Like,
Right.
I think my general thing that I notice when I'm interacting with people who I can tell have a sales background that are coming from a place where they're used to going to a lot of conferences, a lot of networking, whatever that kind of energy is, they come in too hot in a writer space, right?
Mhm.
They come in very aggressive. They come in like trying to hand me a business card, trying to get a commitment or an ask out of me right away. And that's just like not exactly how we do things here. And in part, it's I'm just used to dealing with people who a don't know how to do those things, right? And also, it's such a long term and such a specific relationship business that I think for me, if I'm being treated like a book dispensing machine, like book deal dispensing machine, that's very off putting for me immediately, right? And so I'm going to be less inclined to want to engage with that person, want to work with that person. If you are selling pharmaceuticals, if you're selling, insurance, if you're, I don't, whatever it is, right? Even if it's, business networking in terms of just a general rainmaker for, a B2B kind of thing, the energy you're going to bring to that is really different than in the book space. So, my first advice to you is if you're used to pitching yourself, if you're used to networking, just tone it down a little bit. Like, take off that top layer of instinct that you have on how to navigate those spaces and be just like, be a little bit more, just like turn the dials down one, right? Like, just in terms of intensity and energy. Remember that you're talking to people. Remember that you're talking to people who don't really want to be pitched to in this moment. They want to be talked to like they're a person, right? For me, when I'm at a conference, and this advice kind of goes both ways, both in terms of people who are very nervous and don't know how to network, and people who are maybe a little too good at networking. In both cases, it's a little bit like remember I'm a person, treat me as a person first. Let's have a conversation, and then from there we can get into I'm going to ask about your book at some point, right? Like I know why we're here. I know that this is a writers conference, right? And at some point, if you are chill and cool, we're having this conversation. I'll be like, "What are you working on? What's your project?" Right? But I think leaving that to me to respond to that rather than you pitching me on it, I think is how I tend to prefer things. Not every agent editor is going to be the same way. Some people might like a more direct approach, but again, if you are used to networking, then reading that is going to be the key thing.
Yeah,
But I think in general across the board, take it down one notch if you're used to doing this kind of thing.
yeah, and remember it's a long game. Like I liked what you said, that it was a long game, because it really is about the small contacts over time. You know, you tweeted each other twice, and then you catch up at an event, and then 6 months later you talk again, and now you're ready to maybe talk about pitching a project or whatever.
Yeah.
I remember very clearly, I went to Worldcon in Denver, I think it was, and there was a guy who had decided that I was worth knowing, because I was with Sherlock Mercenary and whatever, and he just small conversations with me 3 times. Like, it was very, very conscious on his part, and I could kind of sense it was a little bit conscious on his part, but he made sure that we had a pleasant conversation, which he then pleasant, short, left. And then a day later, pleasant, short, left.
Yep.
And third day, pleasant, short, left. I remembered him.
Yeah.
And I had enough so that if he wanted to, catch up with me later, I have enough hooks to remember him out of the crowd of people that talked to me. So.
Yeah. I've definitely been on both ends of that. I've definitely been the person who's like, I want to get to know this person. I think they're cool. I want to be friends, whether that was just like, I think they're cool, or I want to work with them, or whatever it is. And that is exactly the strategy. Just those sort of light contacts of just checking in, having a little chat, being like, oh man, it's crazy in here today. Like, I don't know, whatever. Just some small conversation, and then getting out early, right? Not pushing it, not sticking around, overstaying my welcome, going off and doing something else. If I see them again later, another opportunity to go initiate another conversation. And I think those small human conversations are much more effective. I can also tell when somebody's doing it to me, and it works. Like, even when I spot it, I'm like, oh, this is nice.
Yeah.
It's like you've had a couple nice chats with somebody, and then, day 3, conversation 4 or 5, they're like, of just like being in line together or being at the bar or whatever it is. And, they'll just be like, hey, can I tell you about my book project now? I'll be like, oh, yeah, absolutely. And by that point, you've sort of like lulled me into that false sense of security of that social expectation, right? Like, you've hijacked my social brain to be like, oh, I know this person, we're friends. You know what I mean? And then so when they ask me for the bigger ask at that point, I'm just so much more inclined to say yes, right? So it's just a little bit, it's not even necessarily a trick. It's just knowing people, and how people operate. And then having a light touch with it, I think, can get you so much further.
Right. The other thing that I find really powerful in networking spaces is when you talk to people and don't need anything from them.
Yes.
Especially like the people who come at me and are like radiating want.
Yes.
They need something. I have no idea what it is, but I can tell that they want something. And I'm always defensive of that. Like, I don't know what they want. I don't know what they're going to ask. But if somebody who comes and talks to me and doesn't need anything from me, it's much easier to connect.
Yeah. I mean, it's just stressful when somebody's coming in hot that way of like needing something from me very specific. And if you're coming in with like, I want X, and then it's going to be easy for me to say, I'm good, I don't need X right now. You know what I mean? Like, versus if you draw it a little bit more, have a more of a real conversation. What I'm not saying is that you should stalk people and follow them around. That is not a thing that's also going to get you what you want. It is treating somebody with a kind of humanity and not overstaying your welcome when you are having interactions with them. So just to be clear about that.
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to read the next question?
Yes, I will. I'm very good at coming up with characters, settings, and tension-filled situations, but I have a hard time translating that into any sort of an overarching conflict or plot. Where do I start? This is not a great question for me to answer because I'm actually kind of bad at plot.
Yeah.
I am good at characters and themes and emotions, and plots always come second for me. But
well, why do you struggle with that transition then? Let's talk about it this way, because there's not a lot of detail of why plot breaks down in this question. So for you, if you feel good at character and scenario, why is plot an issue in particular? And what does that mean?
Good question. Good. I mean, that I'm gonna have to think about this out loud at everybody. So it's just the point of it, right? I think so much of plot, it helped me a lot when I started just mentally picturing plot as rigging. It is the understructure over which you drape the canvas of your story, and the canvas is the visible part. That's the thing you can see from far away. And what I'm picturing in my brain here, have you ever seen those kinetic sculptures that like walk on the beach?
Yeah.
And then they have all the million moving
Yep.
parts, and they're super fascinating to watch.
I'm blanking on that guy's name. I usually know it, but yeah.
Yeah,
They're really beautiful.
It's gorgeous, and that to me is what a good plot does. It's
Yeah.
not like a tense structure. It is literally this moving thing that but unless you have the structure right, the creature that you're skinning over that doesn't work right. And even though the audience is aware the structure is there, but they're not seeing the bones of it usually.
Yeah.
And so when I have to approach plot, I start by looking at what the emotional moments are. Like, what do I want? Okay, I need a climax moment. I need some. So I pin that down, and then I'm like, well, in order to reach that, I need to pin this down, and then in order to reach that, I need to pin this down. And I've used the Save the Cat as a starting place. That structure. There are many flaws with it. I've also been really interested in non-Western storytelling, Kisho Tenketsu, some of these other things that are less familiar to Western audiences. Because I think actually the types of stories I like to tell don't always fit that hero's journey, 3-act structure. And that may be part of why I've struggled with plot, is because I'm not, in order to create a story that fits that structure, I'm actually creating tension between what I'm trying to create. So that's what I think is my problem with plot, and some of the ways I approach figuring it out.
Yeah. I think that all makes sense. I think when I think about plot and character, the reason I really like this question a lot, actually, even though what I'm about to do is question the question a little bit and question you a little bit here, because, I think for me, I tend not to think of plot as its own category of thing, right? Like, I tend not to think of plot. I'll think about pacing. I'll think about structure. Those are different things to me, but plot in particular feels so deeply tied to character that for me, they don't always feel like different things, right? Because plot is what happens when your character wants something and then intersects with other people who want things, right? And so to me, I think if you're struggling with plot, I go back to what is the character conflict, what is the character tension, right? What does that character want that they're not getting, and what do they need that they don't realize that they need, right? Like, want, need, deserve, right? Like those three ideas in terms of like that helping you sort of build out a character structure, build out a character sort of interaction with the world, feels really like where I start with when it comes to plot. Part of this is driven by like I play a lot of tabletop games as well. Obviously I do I do a lot of editing, but on top of that, I also do a lot of GMing. And I think part of the reason I like GMing is because I have this perspective on plot, that I don't start coming up with the plot of what a campaign or a one shot is until I know who the characters are and what they want, right? And so if you come into my game and be like, here's my cleric, it's a cleric of XYZ, then I know that the plot is going to intersect with questions of faith and religion in some way. And then I look at who else is in this group and like, oh, this is a rogue who likes to steal things from fancy places. Okay, now we have a plot where this person stole something from your temple, right? Or something along those lines, right? You start taking what the characters want and you put them on collision paths with each other, because what they want isn't the same thing. Even if they have the same goal, even if you have two people who are like, I want to overthrow this oppressive fascist regime, they're going to have different ways that they go about doing that. They're going to have different instincts and beliefs about what the best way to do that is. And so now the tension is in between these two characters who have different approaches to revolution, and your plot now emerges from that tension, right? One person
Right.
wants, more direct action. One person wants more politics and more, incremental changes, right? And the tension between those two things is now putting your characters on a collision path with event, right?
Right.
And so to me, plot is plot derives from character, not the other way around, right?
How do you decide what the events are, though?
Because
Because
characters
I mean,
need to
like, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think the character needs to make choices, right? Like, specifically this question is saying good with coming with characters and settings. So it's like, cool, you have a world, you have people who want things, right? And then tension-filled situations, those tension-filled situations are sort of like, I think what they mean by that is probably like uh, shoot, what's it called in a movie where like all the things are a tableau? There's some term for it in terms of like lots of events happening and lots of like a set piece. You
yeah,
sort of have your set pieces. You sort of have where those things are happening, and I think the question is what it comes down to is what are the characters doing at any point in time? What choices are they making? I had a conversation with a friend of mine recently who's really brilliant, wonderful writer, and we were like having an argument where we like couldn't quite understand where the other one was coming from. And at some point, I don't remember the specifics of the conflict we were having, but I ended up finally saying, "Oh, here's the difference. You think words mean things," which is like an insane thing to say as somebody who works with writers and tells stories for a living. Um, but what I meant by that is they were focusing very much on the the things that people said and the words on the page, the promises that were made, and I was focusing on what did anybody actually do about it, what choice was actually made, right? And sometimes saying a thing is the choice, right? If
right,
you were getting married, you are choosing to say the vow. That is an action in a certain way, right?
right.
So if you're looking for where's the plot not going, what events aren't happening, the question I have is what choices are the characters making, right? What opportunity they have to make a decision that could go one way or another that says something more deeply and more profoundly than if they said, I believe in peace or I believe in violent revolution. Having a character say, I believe in peace, and then shoot a cop in the head is going to be a very different kind of story than if you had a character who said, I believe in violent revolution and perform the same act, right? Like
Right.
the way words and actions are in tension with each other is where event and plot unfolds. Does that make sense?
Right.
Sorry for the
That makes
very
sense.
extreme image there. I was just like running through scenarios. But
Yeah.
um, so for me, I think when you're looking at plot, think about character choice and think about character action and how to make them say things without using words, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. How does that fit with, for example, if you're writing a mystery book, there are definite beats you have to hit. If you're reading a romance book, there's definite beats.
Yeah.
How does those beats fit with this organic plot development that you?
I think that's where structure comes in. That's why, to
Okay,
me, structure is a
so
separate
it's
question from
structure,
plot,
not
right?
plot.
Plot is
Okay,
what happens. Structure is, I think that's the kind of thing under the sheet that you were talking about. Like
yeah,
the rigging under the architecture or under the
right,
the shape. That's structure to me. That is point A, point B, point C. We need to have plot. We need to have event here, event here, event here for those things to turn. Now, how you get
you
from A to B to C and what that looks like and what lever you pull to make the sand structure
right.
move forward, that's character to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, was you're attaching plot to character, and I'm attaching plot to structure.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
And I think when people struggle with plot, they're attaching it to structure and not to character, right?
interesting.
I think
Okay,
I think it's like you're trying to rig the thing ahead of time without knowing where the engine is, right? And so the character being the engine, I know we have 8 metaphors layering on each other right now, but the
oh, I know.
character being the engine, I think leads to a more fluid form of storytelling in
Yeah,
most cases. Yeah.
right. I'm gonna have to think about this. This is great. Thank you.
I look forward to having further discussions and arguments about
Yes,
this. You know what I mean?
yes.
Like,
We can
but yeah,
argue more. It'll be
I
fun.
would be delighted to.
Yes.
For example, Mary Robinette does not agree with me on this approach. We have
Yeah,
very divergent approaches to plot, and that's the beauty of the podcast. That's the value, is that we can
exactly.
have different perspectives there. So yeah,
Yep,
I mean, I
absolutely.
still think I'm right, but
Of course you think you're right. It doesn't mean you are.
exactly.
All right, your turn to read.
Ooh, this is a heavy one. Okay.
Yes.
I've had positive feedback on my work from an industry professional, but it came from someone who gave me very bad vibes when I met them. It made me feel creepy. In a world where there are definite bad actors and missing stayers out here sexually harassing people, how do you balance your desire to move through the industry while with being able to sleep at night? And how do you separate, if you do, the personality of those who like your work from their professional criticism? Um, I hate how many times I've had to answer this question in only a year of doing these Q&A streams. This has come up multiple times. It is deeply frustrating and upsetting to run into this question over and over again. And to whoever asked this question, I'm so sorry that you had to deal with this. And I'm so sorry that the industry can still be this way sometimes. I do think we've made some progress, but we're still very far from the world we should be living in. Here's what I will say to you. Don't work with that person. Don't talk to that person ever again. Let your friends know about that person, right? You're asking, how do you separate the personality from them liking your professional criticism? You're right in asking this question. You don't do that. If they're a bad person, if they are violating your boundaries, if they're making you uncomfortable, if they're being creepy and unpleasant, like, you shouldn't work with them under any I don't care how much power that they have. It's not worth it, right? And it won't get you the results that you want in terms of having someone who's going to be an advocate for your book, whether that's an agent, whether that's an editor, whether it's a publisher, whatever it is. That person is not going to be advocating for you in the way that you deserve, in the way that you need to succeed in this industry over the long term, right? Maybe making that deal with that devil will get you a project or two into the marketplace. There are other opportunities. If that person is interested in your work, that means there's something to your work. It's not tied to that person's regard. It's not tied to that person's promises. You need to find the people who believe in you, who aren't going to make that an awful trade-off, right? And so I know it can be really hard in that moment to be like, well, somebody's finally paying attention to me. Somebody's finally, saying that my work is worth something, whatever it happens to be that they're saying. But the thing that I want to remind you of is, in general, across this industry, just because somebody is saying yes to your work does not mean you have to say yes back, right? And that doesn't have to be something as extreme as the kind of harassment that this person is presenting. That can be a small publisher who doesn't have a good plan for how to publish your book. That can be an agent who doesn't seem to be the right fit, or you don't trust, or you don't want to work with for any reason. That can be a deal that the terms are just not strong enough, right? They're not offering enough money. They're taking too many rights, whatever it is. You are the arbiter of what happens with your work. And if one person believed in it, there are likely other people who do, right? And, you need that one yes to get where you want to go. But also, if you believe that your work is worth publishing, that means you believe that there are thousands of people out there who will like your work. That means you just need to find another person in the industry who also sees that potential, right? Don't just say yes because somebody's paying attention to your work. Don't just say yes because somebody's saying yes to you. It's so hard to stand up for yourselves in that moment. It's so hard to remove yourself from that. It's so hard for that to be dangled in front of you with that hook caught up in the middle of it. But you can walk away from that. I promise you'll be fine. I promise there are other opportunities out there.
The thing there that I'm gonna pull a thread on.
Yeah.
Standing up for yourself. This is not a thing I was good at in my younger years. The thing that taught me to be able to be stronger in these kinds of situations, to be able to stand up for myself better, was realizing that when I stand up for me, I'm also standing up for other people. And when you build a network, when you are connecting with people, you have your existing network, all of the people you connect to, and you connect with one other person, you are giving them access to your network. And so if you make a connection and retain a connection with a person who is a bad actor, you are a conduit through which they can reach the people in your network. You have to take responsibility for that. And so you have to say, when you want to stand up to somebody, who am I protecting? And the decision to not stand up is also protecting something, but it's usually protecting status quo, or I don't want to rock the boat, or whatever. But if you stand up and say, you know what, I'm not going to work with that person, it's because you're protecting all of these people. You're protecting people who are not even in your network yet, but will be. Mm-hmm. I had an opportunity to be at the airport this last week and was watching at the airport pickup and drop off, and how incredibly self-interested everyone driving was. And if you choose to work with somebody who has given you creepy vibes, you are being as self-interested as the person who parks in the third lane out just because they don't want to and grabs their luggage, getting in the way of everyone else. So that's hopefully going to help you realize the larger social consequences. The piece that was also in the question, do you take the feedback that person gave you? Yeah, sure. If there's feedback in there that you feel is actionable, that was a gift. You can cut all the strings and go ahead and revise based on what you learned from the conversation that you had, but cut all the strings.
Yeah, I mean, if you think it's useful, if it resonated, you don't owe that person anything. If I'm offering somebody editorial feedback or advice, there isn't an explicit business relationship there, I'm offering that freely, right? And I think that's generally true. If somebody offers you feedback on something, without representation being on the table or anything, it's not, you're not allowed to use that advice. That's not copyrighted. That's, nobody has a claim to that. So if you feel like it's something you want to include and make that change, then take it and sprint off into the distance with it and go sell your book as somebody who doesn't suck, right? Life is too short to work with people who are terrible, or even with people you don't like, right? This is an important process, and it's a special process, and you should be able to be proud of the work that you've done and who you did it with at the end of this process, right? So I encourage you, ask around, find out what people's deal is. If you get a bad vibe, then just run. It's not worth it. Okay, right. Let's go into a little bit of a lighter question.
Yeah, let's talk revisions. How many revisions do you give a project before you pass it on to beta readers? Do you give the first draft away, or at least give it a revision or two? At what point do you start to create or solidify the themes? And when do you think a project is ready for querying? Kind of the core of all of the questions there are, how do I know when it's done? How do I know when it's ready? And I will say, after years and years of lots of writing, you do begin to develop a sense of, I have done what I can. It's time to get somebody else to look at it. But the only way for you to develop that sense is to practice it. The thing that taught it to me was 10 years of blogging. Just because every single blog post I made, I could have made better. I could have made them better, but I needed to let it go and move on. And so learning to just release and let it be is great. One of the things that I do when I'm writing a story, the question of, is it ready for readers, is, do I know of something I can fix? And do I know how to fix it? If I know how to fix it, dive in and fix it before handing it off. If I know it, I usually am staring at it, I'm like, well, I know it's broken, but I don't know how. That's when you hand it to readers.
Yeah.
because they will help you.
Unsurprisingly, I get this question a lot. That's how do you know when it's ready to query, right?
Right.
And the answer I always say is, you know, you're ready to send it out when you're out of questions you know how to answer, right?
Right.
Because to me, editing is about asking questions, right? It's not about telling somebody what to do with the manuscript. It's not about prescribing answers. It's asking a question about, you know, this particular plot beat, this character, this phrasing. What was your intent here? Is it doing the thing you wanted to do? Could it be clearer if we went in this direction, right? I'm not asking somebody to do X, Y, or Z. I'm asking them a question about that aspect of their work, right? And so when you're working on your own stuff too, I think it is questions. It is, should I, you know, revise this character to go in this direction? Should I tighten up the plotting here? Should I, you know, push it in this direction or that direction? I think those are really important questions to be asking. And so when you're asking those questions, and you know exactly what Sandra was saying, when you're not clear on what direction to go in, that's when I think you start needing to hand it off to somebody else, right? So, you know, I think it's just a series of that aspect of like, if you do a draft and you're like, oh, I need to fix X, Y, and Z, you know, Act One is a mess, I got to go clean that up, or like this character's plot arc is not hitting, I think I know how to do that better, I'm going to go do that. Once you've done all that work, that's when I think you start looping other people in and getting their feedback, because you know what you want the project to be, and the question is, I don't know how to answer this question. Can you look at it and answer that for me, right? Or tell me what you think of that question, right? Um, all that said, I know some writers who include betas from the jump, right? Who have people, you know, literally reading while they draft and giving them feedback while they draft. I know some people who do that. It's not everybody, so everyone's going to have a slightly different process on this. I think if I were a novelist, I would more probably err on the side of not showing it to people and working in my little goblin cave for 9 months until it's like, you know, done. But yeah.
I actually had a conversation with Mary Robinette about exactly that. She does beta readers as she's drafting. And to me, that breaks my brain. Too much feedback while I'm crafting the story will actually lock me up. And I then get confused and I lose track of what the voice I wanted, and I lose track of my internal compass for this story because there's too much feedback and I get locked up. As a matter of fact, I've frequently had the experience where I'm like, okay, it is ready. I am now going to send it through the critique group that I have. And I send 2 chapters through. And in the course of those 2 chapters, I have a realization about the entire rest of the book. And I yoink it back and I submit no more until I have fixed the entire rest of the book. And then I will start over and start submitting either from chapter 1, or I'll pick up where I left off and just tell them, oh, by the way, all of this is different. Let's move forward. But I have to step back into my own, where I can hear my own voice space.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's do a couple more questions here.
Yes.
Kind of related to that one. Any tips for someone stuck on editing and revising? How do you decide your priorities on what to edit, change first? And how can you judge your work fairly, even if it looks bad when you're deep inside it? And that one's from Barefoot Writer. That's a tough one. How do you decide on the priorities when you're drafting?
Oh, sorry, hang on. I accidentally hit a mute button. That's not good. Priorities when I'm drafting. This is one of the ones that's hard because at this point I have a long experience and a well-developed instinct of what needs to be done. And I'm having trouble remembering before I had that instinct because it's now so ingrained. And I think, again, it is a result of practice. It is, you know, and learning to listen to your own instinct and voice. I think most of the writers that I know have had the experience of they got feedback and now they're completely pulled off and the off base, and the story ends up being kind of a crumpled mess because they listened to too many people. And finding the thread, the thing that you love about it, brings you back to center. And also always listen to the voice that says, no, I don't think that needs to be changed. The feedback said change this, and If it's really your heart is saying no, then no.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I think in terms of priorities, it's like on one level, don't worry about it too much, right? On one level, change the stuff you want to change, whatever you're most excited to like or pull towards, or you think is the most interesting problem or the thorniest problem. Like, there's kind of not really a wrong answer of what to start working on first, you know. I think where that can go awry is if you're only changing surface level stuff and there's a deep rooted question underneath it. Don't do all the surface level stuff if you know you're going to be like deleting 30,000 words out of this book, right? You know what I mean? Like, in general, do the bigger lift stuff first, like structural stuff. If you know you need to rewrite an entire character's plot line, if you need to cut something, those are the kind of things I would do before I would do the more like surface level elements in terms of like a voice pass or tightening something up or something like that, right? So in terms of prioritizations, I would focus on bigger stuff first, then little stuff. But in terms of like if you have 3 big questions or 7 little questions, like which of those 7 questions do you do first? I don't think it matters a ton. And I think, like you said, you'll develop an instinct over time of what to do first and how to do it. To the second part of this question, in terms of like judging your work fairly, even if it looks bad when you're deep inside it. I think making sure you have perspective is a really difficult thing. And this is part of why betas are really helpful, right? This is part of why having other people looking at it or other people to talk to about it are really helpful because they'll like sort of drag you back on track, right? Like, you don't have this particular tool, but a lot of times my clients will come to me like, and they'll be like, I think this book might be bad. I think it might suck. I think it's awful. I think I'm doing a bad job. And I will just be like, no, you're just 2/3 of the way through writing this book, and this happens every time, right? Like, and or you're just halfway through your 3rd edit of this thing. Of course you hate this book. Of course you think it's bad. All you've been doing is touching the parts of it that aren't working, right? So a person to remind you of the thing that you were doing, that you still believe in the book, even though you are up to your eyeballs in the worst parts of it, will be enormously important and helpful to you, right? And so finding those people in your life, getting a writing group, getting beta readers, having a supportive partner, whatever it is, right? I think all of that can be enormously helpful to you for managing your sort of emotional state and keeping the creativity accessible and flowing in a certain way, if that makes sense.
absolutely. One of the things I talk about frequently in presentations in the book that I've written and is knowing what roles you need in your life, in your creative life. Yeah. You need a cheerleader, you need a critiquer, you need an enabler, which is a person who just makes getting the work done easier. The person who just brings you the snacks when you need the snacks, for example. And so there's a whole host of roles that you need, and when you have them, when you have that moment where you're like, oh, I really need to talk to Joe right now, it's because something in you knows that Joe's going to give you the response that you need, the answer that you need. And so when you start to doubt, and self-doubt is so much, it's like a fog or a cloud that just swoops in and doesn't let you see the project clearly. You get somebody who has an industrial strength fan to blow the fog away and let you.
And the thing to remember is that I literally, every single writer I've ever worked with has these bouts of complete self-doubt about a project, right? No matter how confident they are in their ability as a writer overall, writing a book is really hard. And there will be periods in that process where you will look at what you're doing and say, this isn't good enough. This isn't great. Like it's this book isn't working, whatever it is. And so, I would say take a step back. If you don't have that person to lean on, try and take a step back and ask yourself, what do I like about this project? Why am I writing it? Take a breather, go do something else for a minute, honestly. Take a step back from the project and set a timer of when you're going to come back to it, whether that's later today or tomorrow or in 3 weeks. You know what I mean? Make sure that you're making a commitment to, I will come back to this, because if you leave when you're down point, you may just walk away and never come back. But also taking a breather from that negative feeling will get you in the headspace you need to be in, that you can keep working on the project. So, I mean, I think a lot of being in publishing, being a writer, is holding two opposing ideas in your head at once, right? And this is one case of, it's not good enough. I need to keep working on it. I need to keep writing. I need to listen to feedback of the people around me. And the other voice in your head that has to be there is, this book is one of the best things that's ever been written. It's so important. People deserve to read this, right? You need to believe in yourself in a completely unhinged way when you're writing a book, right? You need to believe that not only does it deserve, do you need to finish this book, but that people will want to read this, and millions of people want to read this, right? That's like a necessary thought that you have to have, of like, your work is good enough
Yes.
that you want people to engage with it on that level, And so being able to hang on to that sort of unhinged self-confidence, and if you get yourself to the headspace without it getting in the way of doing the work that you need to be doing to make the book good, I think that's the trick to success in so many ways.
I do not succeed at the unhinged confidence very often. What I do succeed at is, I know someone who needs this story.
Yeah.
And so I'm not doing it because I believe everyone and it's amazing or anything like that. It is literally, I know a person who needs
Yeah.
this story, so I'm going to write it, because if there's one person who needs it, there's probably more than one.
Yes.
And so that is the thing that lets me continue forward. It is not unhinged self-confidence ever.
I think that is the more reasonable version of it. I would
Yeah.
encourage you to be even less reasonable about it. You know what I mean? Like,
I'll work on it.
and again, not in a way that you turn into an ego
Right.
monster and throw your
Right.
weight around, but like, really, why are you writing this book, right? And who's this book
Right.
for? The answer should be a lot of people.
Right.
The answer is, you have an important thing to share with us, and we deserve to hear that. And
Right.
if you start with one person out there deserves to hear it, then, and that's what you need to get there, then fantastic.
Yeah.
And the more you can sort of build that up within yourself, I think the better you'll do over the long term. So
Makes sense. Makes sense.
we started a little late, so shall we do one more question and then break?
Yeah, we can do that. I kind of want to jump to this bottom question.
Great, let's do it.
Okay. It's my turn to read, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So. All right. So you've had a bad day or week or month or whatever. What do you do when you have a deadline for completing a project and you've fallen behind? Do you reorganize, try to push harder to get back on track, or just change your mindset? How is the process different when you're not a professional yet and money isn't as much on the line? One of the things, anytime you're going to miss a deadline, first thing you have to do is look at how much of a deadline is it actually. Is this something that can be renegotiated? Are other people depending upon it? The level of deadline varies greatly depending on what's going on, which is part of what is this the last question. What if no one's counting on it? What if the only deadline was a one you set for yourself, which is a different challenge. For me, I've blown so many deadlines. So it is just a thing that happens. And one of the things you have to do anytime you're emerging from your bad day or bad week or bad month or whatever is to take a moment to breathe and really assess where you are and what you actually can do from where you are. That deadline, that plan was made from a different position. And you are now in a new position, which might give you some advantages, it might give you some disadvantages, but you have to truly evaluate where you are and whether the old plan is relevant, whether you can salvage pieces from it, whether you can, or whether you can just crunch it together and still make deadline, or whether you need to reconstruct. But that moment of assessment is the key thing, because you're not starting from the same place. And I'm trying to think The push harder to get back on track really depends on what put you off track and how badly it put you off track. Because if what we're talking about is, well, my spouse died and my entire life is different, well, you need to give yourself a lot more grace with deadlines than if it's, I twisted my ankle in a hurt all weekend.
I think the thing that I have seen so much in my experience over the years, and listen, if I had a magic bullet to get a writer back on deadline, Lord knows my career would look very different than it does right now. It's a fact of life. You're making art. It doesn't fit to deadlines. It doesn't fit to a 9 to 5 day structure in terms of getting the project in on time every single time. Some people can do that. Some people's brains are wired to write books to a particular target, and I think that's incredible and it's powerful. But that is a rarity in this business. So I wouldn't. I think the thing that I'm most nervous about when I see a question like this and I see there's an instinct, I think, to muscle through it. You kind of even said that of like get back on deadline and push harder. I think it's an instinct to try and push through whatever that block was. And I think that rarely leads to good results. I think that leads to books that aren't as strong as they could be. I think it leads to burnout. I think it leads to falling off on your deadline again later and feeling even worse about it than you did before, right? So what I encourage you to do is take a step back and try and see if you can figure out where the problem is in a way that isn't just like, oh, I'm not working hard enough, right? Like that isn't just like being hard on yourself for not putting enough hours in. Is there something in the project that's not working? Is there a plot line that you're not excited about? Is something about the book not clicking for you in a way that it was? Is it just that this part's hard and you gotta try and figure out, navigate your way through it, right? Where is your joy and excitement in writing this project? And how do you get that back, right? And sometimes that can be as simple as like, creating a little bit of a treat reward system for yourself. Like I know clients who've been like struggling on a project, like, okay, every 1,000 words, I get a jelly bean. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it can be something that simple, but sometimes it is taking a step back and be like, damn, this whole plot's not working. Or like, I thought I was excited about this aspect of the world building and it's just not working. It's dragging it down. It's bumming me out. So I don't want to work on it because I'm bummed out, right? And sometimes it's just a mental health thing, right? Sometimes it's just like, hey, certain medications are hard to get right now, or, you're just in a slump and you need to find your way back out of it. And, whatever strategies you use to get out of a mental health slump in general are ones that you want to be using here in terms of making sure you're taking care of your body, making sure your schedule is, manageable. You're getting enough sleep, you're getting enough water, you're going outside. Literally, I'm telling you to touch grass, right? Like, any of those things that would help when you're in a depressive slump, when you're, struggling with something in general in your life. If writing is emotional work and it's hard emotional work, and if your mind isn't in a place where it is operating, as best as you can get it to, then that's gonna make it harder to work on this thing, right?
Absolutely.
I think there's a real pernicious myth out there that miserable people write good fiction or make good art, and I think it's absolutely insane. I think being miserable makes making art infinitely harder. So what I encourage you to do is if you're stuck in a project, if you're blowing your personal deadlines, if there isn't an external deadline, you're feeling unhappy about that, take a step back, take a look at your life. What things can you address on the short term and the long term to make space for your writing, to find the joy in the project, to find the joy in the process again? And talk to people in your life about what can they do to provide help and support for you in that too, right? Whether that's a partner, that's your family, whether that's coworkers, friends, whatever it is. Maybe it is getting that encouragement from them. Maybe it's getting time from them and just being like, hey, can I get 2 hours to do this once a week, you know what I mean, or whatever it is. Or can I get an extra time to go like sit in the park, or can we go for a walk every day, whatever it is, right? Find a thing that helps boost your mental health, your perspective, and I think that will help you more than kind of beating yourself up about blowing a deadline. I think beating yourself up about blowing a deadline only leads to more slipped deadlines down the line. So, really think about how do you tap into what do you love about working on this project and empowering yourself on that front. So that's kind of my answer there.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I always encourage people to remember is that if pushing to hit this deadline breaks you, it has broken all of your future projects until you figure out how to heal.
Yeah.
And so what does meeting this deadline cost, and is it worth it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think with that we will end our little Q&A this month. Thank you everyone for coming to this this live streamed Q&A session. Sorry we started a little late with some of the audio issues. I swear we're going to solve that one of these days. I'm going to make it my life's mission to fix this. I'm gonna deal with it. We're gonna fix it. It's gonna be great. And people will have to deal with my solution. Okay. Sandra, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you online?
SandraTaylor.com, or Dongwon dropped in the chat. I don't actually have access to the chat. My current project, which shiny cover behind me, Structuring Life to Support Creativity. And actually that last question, a bunch of the stuff in the book is directly aimed at those questions. So.
Sandra, you would have missed this because you can't see the chat, but as soon as we got back on the live stream, one of the first questions was, I need that book behind Sandra. How do I get it? And I was like, well, good news. We have a solution for you. So
good news, yes.
Yeah. So to submit questions for next month's stream, you can join our Patreon where you can find ad-free episodes, get an invite to join our Discord, and more. You can find that at patreon.com/writingexcuses. For everything else, check us out on Instagram at writingexcuses and on Twitter and Blue Sky also at writingexcuses. Thank you all so much for coming, and we'll see you next month. You're out of excuses. Now go write.